Welcome to Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace. This week's show is on righteous anger. We will be discussing how to use anger for good, and we've got an amazing panel. Thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to all of your comments and questions. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you are on Facebook, grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you have a comment or question. And remember, please keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. I want to give a big shout out to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. Thank you so much. And thank you for welcoming us into your home and joining the conversation. I appreciate you. On a side note, I am working with the Wild Goose Festival this year. It will be in North Carolina, July 13th through the 16th. We are doing a live show there. If you want to go or plan on attending, I have a $50 discount code for you. Simply use my name, make sure you spell it right, and you will get $50 off. You can find out more at the wildgoosefestival.org, and I would love to see you there. Okay, let's meet our guests and get smarter. Danae was raised in a fundamental evangelical Christianity, a preacher's kid no less, and she spent several years in ministry herself. She now works with people in all stages of deconstruction towards spiritual health and wellness, whatever that means for them. Welcome back, Danae.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
Thank you for joining. This is going to be a great conversation.
I'm super excited about it.
Next, we have Kirsten Feisel. She has over 30 years of experience in the field of violence against women. She seeks to encourage people in a movement to change the social and political systems that perpetuate violence. She does this through education, public policy, and social change efforts. Welcome, Kirsten.
Hello.
So glad you're here.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Tim Hammett. Before his retirement in 2019 from the Department of Public Defense, Tim served as a Presbyterian ministry for over 20 years. Presently, he is an audio technician for live music venues and is an active blues drummer. There you are. Welcome, Tim.
Good evening.
So this conversation, we have some shout outs. What's up, David? This conversation has been brewing across social media as well as our society as to what is right and what is wrong about anger and its results from it. So I want to start the show with simply saying that there is nothing wrong with any emotion. Anger in itself is not wrong. Where wrong or right comes into play is what you do with that anger. So how you react to that is whether or not you're going to be labeled as good or bad, right or wrong. And I can tell you that violence is never the answer. So starting with those disclaimers, Danae, what say you?
Well, I have to agree, right? I think I was a preschool teacher for many years. I worked with teenagers for many years. I have 3 young children now. And I think it's really important that we teach that emotions in and of themselves are not good or bad. It's what we do with them, right?
Right.
And I also teach my kids there's no such thing as bad words, only bad ways to use them.
Okay.
And I think that's really important. Now, there's time and place is important. Age is also appropriate, sometimes about when you use certain words or how you use them. But I think ultimately we assign morality to things like emotions and words and things like that don't necessarily warrant it. And we use to assign morality a lot of times to things we should get angry about or should be upset about. And so I think that this is a good conversation to talk about, where are we assigning morality? Where is it useful to do so? How do we channel those things for good?
Well, and just to say that I wore this shirt on purpose because people in power don't like an angry electorate or angry people. Mm-hmm. So we must keep that in mind too when someone is demonizing anger. Yep. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I believe that what is fashionable today are two opposite ends of the spectrum regarding anger. Destructive anger has been normalized and become quite popular. But many times in response to that is the sanitizing of anger. And so where is this, if you want to call it a middle section or a productive or more engaging section with these things? And I know that many of these conversations are within the paradigm of religion, because we're obviously talking about righteous anger, and even more specifically within a Christian paradigm, when all three major religions, the Abrahamic religions, do address the dynamic of anger, right or wrong, good or bad, however you want to label that. One thing my mother always taught me is, in regards to the practice of my faith, is to make sure that you're not so heavenly minded that you're not any earthly good. And I think that is very important for this topic of anger today. And I'm not going to, with my introduction, go through everything, but what I want to do is start from a premise that anger and trauma are definitely connected in many ways. And that does not mean that if we get healed from trauma, that our anger goes away. It is channeled. So that is my major premise, and I will defer now to Kirsten.
Yeah, I mean, I look back 30 years ago, and someone mistreated my son, and I lost my shit. And looking back, it wasn't necessarily that he was mistreated per se. He probably wouldn't even remember the event, but it was my trauma and my fear that he was going to be treated the way that I was that sparked that rage. Kirsten, what do you say?
I say that I look like I'm on Star Trek in a romantic scene and they put a filter over camera.
And I'm jealous.
But anyway, aside from that, a couple things come to mind while you were talking. One is that for women in particular, we are not supposed to be angry. Anger is not ladylike. So you're told to kind of swallow your anger. And I think that's because one of the primary purposes of anger is to let us know that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Marshall Rosenberg says that, that our emotions tell us whether our needs are being met or not. So if you're angry, that's a big red flag that you have unmet needs, like for dignity or for, equity, all of these things, which is probably why people become very uncomfortable when women get mad. Or when anybody that's being oppressed or restricted gets angry. And the other thing that comes to mind is I think that we have a very destructive cultural narrative that anger and violence are the same thing.
Right.
Or that one necessarily causes the other, which it doesn't.
Or justifies it.
Yes, there are some really calm, rational people who have committed some of the greatest atrocities in history, right? They were not angry. And at the same time, anger has been that fire that lets you keep going when you've had the last couple of months in my state legislature, as I have. It just keeps you in there pushing ahead.
I like that, because anger kind of is a fuel, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, emotions are kind of a fuel, I guess, things that you cling to and want, and things that drive you. And anger would definitely be, and then that's why I said, it really is your reaction to it. So if I get angry and I go protest, that's constructive. If I get angry and I go shoot someone or burn down a building, that is completely destructive. And again, just because I'm angry, it doesn't justify violence.
Correct.
And I think it's important to recognize too that different people are going to decide or define constructive versus destructive differently. I think that there are people who are going to define even simple peaceful protesting as destructive in ways or wrong.
Ruffling feathers is more like it.
Certainly a lot of people are going to describe it as unhelpful, not effective and things like that. But a lot of people actually subscribe some sort of like morality to it. It's right or wrong, or it's destructive in some way, it's disrespectful in some way. I was actually thinking today about Colin Kaepernick's peaceful protesting by kneeling at the beginning of football games during the anthem. Mm-hmm. And there are people who would consider that wrong, bad, disrespectful, and assign a destructive value to that, to whereas other people are going to describe that as constructive.
Sorry, right? I'm not saying that what you're saying is, but it is bullshit. Right. That is why I was saying people in power tend to say don't get angry. It's because they don't want to be accountable.
Right.
So, and I think that's to me the biggest the sticking point for me lately is about anger and how it's perceived, right? And it's about accountability. It's because people don't want to be held accountable, or they're afraid of it, or in some way, shape, or form, it threatens them, right? I actually had a very, very dear friend, someone I respect very much, who is still very evangelical, post recently this week something along the lines that it's this like new popular fad that Satan uses to basically harm the church, harm Christianity, to harm God. The newest fad that Satan uses is bashing the church from Christians. And I was like, and I didn't comment on it because it just really triggered my anger, right?
Yeah.
I got really angry at this. But I took it into, I have a closed deconstruction group, and I, posted the quote anonymously because I don't want to harm my friend who I love and respect very much. But I was just like, guys, this triggered me and I need to talk about this. And I said, is it always bashing if you say something negative about the church?
Right.
Is there a time when this bashing is necessary or helpful? And it ended up being a really good conversation. And a lot of people talked about that point right there, that, anything angry or anything that's against you, that accountability piece, right? And then so that anger is perceived as bashing and not accountability, no matter how it's handled, right? And a very dear friend of mine commented on it. She's a Black woman, and she said, if I say anything negative without, she's like, even if I do it perfectly calm, I get labeled an angry Black woman.
Exactly.
Well, and that's what I was just going to bring up.
I was going to bring that out.
Sorry, Tim. I was just going to bring this up. Is there is no one more marginalized on this planet than Black women.
Yep.
And I think there's also no one more feared of their anger than Black women. So they have this total, negative connotation of, whoa, watch out for them.
And even if they handle it in the calmest way possible, and Kirsten already touched on this with women in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, even when women handle things in the calmest way possible, if you are perceived as angry, even though I can say it level, calm, if I'm perceived as angry, I'm irrational. And a lot of times it's because we're pointing to some level of accountability and people don't want to hear it, and it threatens them. And so what scares them is not the anger. What scares them is the threat to their power, their comfortability, something along those lines. And, I'm not here for that.
Tim, and it's interesting that gay bashing and woman bashing are like real physical things that happen to people. And then that's kind of paralleled with this idea of, you said things that I didn't like. Mm-hmm. You were bashing me.
Well, is that not what we see in the church?
No, those two are just not the same thing. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, I'm being persecuted for my faith.
Yeah.
That's the same thing, right? They take these words and yeah, spot on.
Tim, what were you going to say?
Well, there's a couple of points I want to make at this juncture, and number one is I see a parallel between anger and pain, and what I mean by that is that we would not assign a morality to pain unless we're inflicting pain on someone. But my pain does not have a moral component to it. It can be destructive, but it also tells me that something's wrong. And it's on the spectrum of senses, of feeling things. And if you continue to go down that track, it winds up in pain. But to eliminate pain altogether would be horribly destructive to us. And so it's a reality of our existence as human beings. The other point that I'd like to make, and it's already been brought up, in regards to labeling people, how many times do you hear angry white man? Never. Angry Black woman, angry Black man, angry woman. Never angry man, though.
Well, I actually say it all the time.
Well, But what I'm saying,
But
my
in
point
in
is,
regards to
Right.
MAGA,
Okay.
in regards to our politics,
I think you're
there's
right.
a lot of angry
but
white
white men control the narrative on this
Yes.
one as well. And this
Yeah.
is where I want to dive into it. My major supposition on this was that trauma and anger are related. And you've probably heard of epigenetic trauma, and that is, it's not so much that trauma is passed on through the genetic structure as much as the it rides on it, and it is more and more being proven that this is reality.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a statement, and I want people to think about it before I answer it or someone else answers it. But in regards to American trauma, when we coalesce the sum total of American trauma, what comes to mind? Now that is a thoughtful pause, but that is an actual question, and we'll let it sit there. But this is making an extremely important point.
I mean, my
time,
first thing that came to mind was the Native Americans.
Okay,
And
fair enough.
slavery.
Fair enough. Keep
Could
going.
we read the question one more time?
Yes.
Yeah,
When
that'd be
we
great.
when we coalesce the sum total of American trauma, what comes to mind? The Native Americans. Okay. What about the Atlantic trade, slave trade, that
was
has
my next
never
thing,
been
slavery.
publicly and nationally addressed to this day? Now, let me. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jim Wallace. He was the founder and ambassador of Sojourners, and he published a book back in 2015, which I think is really great. And America's Original Sin, Racism, White Privilege, and the Bridge to a New America. He wrote this, and I completely agree with this. Involuntary servitude was banned by the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but nothing was done to confront the ideology of white supremacy. Slavery didn't end in 1865, it just evolved. Now, my point is simply this. When we're all white on this panel, I'm the only man. When we talk about anger, we process that in a completely different way than the Afro-American community. And I'm going to say something that'll probably offend some people. We whites have a tendency to process our trauma, and trust me, I've been a counselor for years. I believe in counseling, I believe in psychotherapy, all this. But the first thing that we do is go and try to get rid of our anxiety, our trauma, our anger through whitewashing, perhaps through therapy. And this is where it's going to really upset some people. New Age stuff, essential oils, crystals.
Yeah.
That's because we can afford it. The Black community does not mess around with these things. They get angry, they go to the streets, and they affect real change. And look at Martin Luther King. I mean, there's plenty of his letter from the Birmingham jail, which, by the way, was an indictment against the church for its accommodation on these things. So if we're going to address trauma, we need to ask Afro-Americans who have been the victims primarily of a systemic racism and for 300 years of enslaving these people that has brought us the America that we have today. And that is still not on the public dialogue. It's completely off. So we cannot address it as Jesus addressed it in regards to the social inequities I believe, without addressing these matters.
Yeah, I agree. Ladies?
No, I think that you're absolutely right. I think also something that I came to terms with in 2016 and maybe a little bit before that, and it wasn't even the Donald Trump coming up as president as much as, I mean, that was also a catalyst, but it was the mainstream media finally picking up on the police brutality against the Black communities.
Right.
And mainstream media finally picking up on that and starting to publicize it so that way people like me noticed it. I had always been apolitical because I didn't see where elections had anything to do with my daily life. And it wasn't until I saw the mainstream media picking up things that I didn't have to see in my daily life or experience in my daily life. My parents didn't have to tell me about as a child, how to behave, how to do these things, how not to behave, so that way I could be safe, or at least try to be safe. I didn't have to experience all those things on a daily basis. And so until I saw it on television and started talking to my friends who are Black, and they were willing to be honest with me about their experiences, which that's a lot of emotional work for them. I'm very thankful for that. I did not see how politics had any effect on daily life.
Well, but that is privilege. That,
yes, it's the absolute definition of privilege, right?
Yes, that is the absolute definition of privilege.
Then I realized that it does affect lots of people on a daily basis. Even the national, presidential elections affect plenty of people on a daily basis. It just doesn't affect me because of my privilege. And that was when I came face to face with my privilege. That was when I came face to face with so many things about how systemic these problems were. And I had already kind of learned, little bits and pieces, but that's when it smacked me in the face, right? And it was that anger of Donald Trump getting elected. And I participated in the Women's March in DC, the day after his inauguration, but getting connected with other people who also went, who were actually activists, and getting mad about the things that were happening, the families being separated at the border, or some of the issues with the Supreme Court and things like that. And that anger prompted me to finally take action. But until I saw the harm being done to other people, a lot of times until we see it, or unless it's personal, right? And in my particular case, I didn't need it to be personal to me. I just needed to see that it was personal to somebody.
Yeah.
Because my privilege.
And that's what I want to say about, Tim, what you said. We can go buy oils and crystals and stuff like that to try and help us with our anger, but we're not angry because we are being targeted every day, where if if we get pulled over, we know we're safe. Our anger is more personal,
right,
as opposed to social.
To collective, as opposed to collective.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And that's the the epigenetic component.
And that's why we can choose.
We aren't clearing generations of trauma.
Yeah. I think it should be our decision. We can choose to stand with them and to say, stop this. Our anger, our empathy for what that's what gets me going more than anything, is injustice.
And to be honest, there are times we need to stand. Yeah. There needs to be times where we stand in for them. Like anytime where I get tired, tired from activism, anytime I get tired because of the next dumpster fire, I remind myself of the generations of people in this country who have Black and brown skin, who are so much more exhausted than I will ever know.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones who are living today are not just carrying their own exhaustion from their whole lives, but again, epigenetically, they are carrying the trauma and exhaustion from generations.
They are.
They can do it. I can do it. And there are times where I need to do it so they can have a rest.
You go, Danae.
Where I need to put my body on the line because they have to put their body on the line every single day. And I think that's really the thing. I do not feel guilty about slavery, having never owned a slave. However, I do see it as my part that my ancestors owe the groups of people here today who have been oppressed for generations, and what I can do to make amends as someone who is white and who has been
I owe them.
Benefited from the system.
I owe them my time now. I didn't create the crime. I didn't create the issues. I didn't ever own slaves.
But I benefited from it.
But I owe them.
Yeah.
You benefited from it, and you're the one that's here.
Yeah.
It's just like, if you saw somebody hit by a car in the street, you're not just going to walk by and go, well, I didn't drive the car.
Correct.
You have an ethical obligation because you are the one that's present. And if you have that privilege, then leverage the privilege to stand between, to lift the voice, etc.
Do whatever you can do. Yeah.
And I think the issue with the police brutality is kind of interesting because I'm gonna talk about domestic violence here, and then I'll connect. One of the biggest myths about domestic violence is that it's caused by anger. It is not caused by anger at all. Period.
Power.
It is Yes, it is caused by entitlement, by privilege, and by a belief that, I should be getting certain things and I'm not getting them. And so I get angry. So anger is the symptom of the belief system, right? But it's a trap because culturally we believe that anger equals violence. When we see the violence, then we'll say, oh, they must have been angry. They must have been angry at something. And because you're talking about mainly men, they're in a position of power, we're going to say, well, clearly it must be some rational thing. Their anger must be righteous. And so we come up with reasons. Well, she cheated. Well, she was a bad mom. Well, etc. And that same thing that happens in families is played out on our larger scale culture. Yeah. So we see police brutality, and the very first thing that happens is everyone rushes in to explain the behavior. Well, they felt threatened. Well, if that person hadn't struggled. Well, if, and because if they're angry, they must be angry for a reason. And then for the people that are on the bottom, if they're angry, well, it's because you're irrational. You're less smart. You are more bestial.
Right.
And so it's our anger is justified. Your anger is irrational and dangerous. And therefore, when we use violence against you, that's okay. And that's actually what we base our foreign policy on, honestly.
Right.
So it really operates at every level.
It is.
And ultimately, if it's about that sense of entitlement and I'm not getting what I should, you're challenging me, you're challenging my beliefs, you're challenging my privilege, etc. Underneath that anger is fear, right? So what happens if I am not the, cock of the walk? What if I am not the biggest person in the play yard? What if I don't have all the power? What if I actually have to share power? What if this person that I've been crapping on my whole life is in a position where maybe they could crap on me? Are they going to treat me the same way that I've treated them?
Immigration policy.
Yes. So much of it is actually this fear-based thing that helps us to keep the status quo.
Yeah. And I have to say, my dad was a really evil man. Rarely angry. Never overtly angry. But I really, really struggled for anything that he could do, that he did good in his life before obviously his children. But I came up with one thing, and it's totally pertinent to this conversation. Justification is just like masturbation. You're only fucking yourself. So when you have to justify, Danae went.
I like this.
It's a gold. It's gems. But when you have to justify your bad behavior off of victimizing or further victimizing someone else, you're fucking everybody at that point, and not in the good ways.
If I may add also, when we think about, and I know sometimes the debate is again that anger and rage is a primitive emotion, and I'm not denying that. But in regards to the higher thinking and rational thinking, we can learn a lot again from Martin Luther King, who, and I'm going to address, if you would put up perhaps the link on for the book of Misha Cherry's book, The Case for Rage, is that even though it may be primitive, it nonetheless has to be focused. And it's not unlike fire is very primitive, but we wouldn't be able to exist without the use of fire. You can burn down a house, or you can have laser surgery.
Conversations.
Right. And this is an extremely important point. Misha Cherry in her book had 4 different types of anger, and she proposes the 5th as the most constructive. And I'm not going to go through and define all these because people can simply access her book.
It's
She talks
available on
about,
Amazon. It's available everywhere.
right. She talks about rogue rage. That's not road rage, rogue rage. And it is an anger at injustice, but it's not necessarily with persons or institutions that caused it. A person with rogue rage blames almost everything. They're angry 24/7 at everybody and everything. Wipe rage is just that. I'm going to I'm going to delete these people, and that's where it turns into extreme violence. She also has what's called resentment rage. Now that sounds like a redundant, but it is resentment, but it's also resentment aimed at special groups. But we think that we are the elite ones and we have a right to be angry with these other groups. The last one is narcissistic rage. I think we're kind of familiar with that. But she has what's called Lord rage, Lor or Lordian rage, that's named after the black feminist and scholar Audre Lorde.
Oh.
And she's
Sure.
the one that focuses in on taking this fire and focusing it and going after the injustice. And again, if you get into all the background voices that were after Martin Luther King, I mean, he had to deal with pacifist on one side and extreme militant on the other side. But at the end of the day, what shocked Americans with what took place in Washington, D.C. on the March on Washington with the Civil Rights Movement. It was one of the most peaceful, but most effective movements ever. And it spoke to the United States, the white culture, that look, here's what you thought were the black people that can do nothing. Look what they're doing. And it scared us to death.
Well, like
Scared us to death. And we've been pushing back ever since, by the way. We've been pushing
back.
back.
Showing up in Sacramento with guns, and all
Yes.
of a sudden, guns were outlawed.
Which
Yes.
I think they hit every
By
right.
Reagan. By Reagan, yes.
Yeah.
And well, Maya Angelou says that anger is like a fire; it burns it all clean.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So there's another wonderful, wonderful black woman giving us wisdom. There's some people that say again that anger is just a secondary emotion, and that it's really rooted in something deeper, which is fear, and that there's really only two emotions: love and fear.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
And so when we see all of this oh my gosh, I mean, can we just talk about the anti-trans hatred
Yes.
and anger? I mean, talk about fear. I have it's just crazy.
The only fear
everywhere.
I have over drag shows is them wanting to take my boots. It's truly my only fear. I mean, because I've literally had to. We wear the same size. I'm 6 feet tall. You know, they come up and they're like, "You've got some great boots," with a T. Boots. But that's my only fear. They are so much fun. They are entertaining. They're. I am more.
They're flat out wholesome. They're wholesome. I mean, they are wholesome. I would take my kids to drag shows, except I have one fear, that it would be the one time that Christians would come and do something violent.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. That is my only reason that I would not expose my kids to something like that, would be fear that it would be the one time and place that I just happen to be in the wrong time, wrong place, and Christians would target it. That's
But
it.
if we're focused on LGBTQ exclusion, and then we can't fight for everything else that they're doing. And it moves our anger into irrelevant things like bathrooms, like all of those things. So how do we focus and make sure that our anger is channeled in the correct direction? I mean, the J6 people,
Yeah.
they went to Washington thinking that they had righteous anger.
Yeah.
They thought that they were doing the right things because someone was going to take their country. How do we have that discernment to know that we're getting angry about the right things.
I think this starts with listening. Earlier we were talking about how we need to listen to Black women, right? And I'm a big fan of, if a Black woman says it, I'm probably going to follow it, because even if she's wrong, she's got better discretion than anybody else I know. But we need to listen to people who are marginalized. And so when it comes to, any marginalized population and our righteous anger involving how they're being treated or oppressed or whatever, we listen to them, whether that's people who are poor and struggling with the economy, whether that's people who are, Black or brown and struggling with racism, whether that's people in the LGBTQ community who are struggling with discrimination and hate crimes. We listen to them and we follow their lead. I think this is something I see a lot with us whites, is we want to then take the lead. No,
right.
We don't need to. We need to follow their lead. And, when appropriate, when they say it's appropriate, say, hey, if you need a break, I'll take over. But it's only for their benefit, not for centering myself.
I've been to protests where I was pushed to the front of the line because I was one of the only whites there.
Yeah.
And it was, we want the news to see that you're here. We want your face up front. Had they not requested that, my ass was in the back.
Right. But they requested it because it was advantageous to them. And you said, yes, use me to your advantage. That's perfectly okay. Absolutely. Yeah. Use me to your advantage.
Exactly.
But if I am not here to your advantage in some way, feel free to send me to the back, or just say you can go.
Totally.
And that is hard for our general demographic to accept that leadership, but we follow their lead. And I think that's a lot of it when it comes to how to channel our anger is, Sherry talked about at the very beginning is, are we doing actual harm to people? So am I doing physical harm to someone or even verbal harm to someone? Am I actively harming someone and doing something that's outside of love? And two, am I following the lead of the people who are directly affected by whatever I'm angry about? And I think that you can still go wrong. You can still make missteps, but you're going to make so many less missteps if you do those two things, right?
Yeah, that was great.
If there's only two emotions, fear or love, and I'm suddenly in focus. How about that? Then if your anger is out of fear, there's a good chance that you're going to be more destructive, right? But if your anger is out of love, I mean, when I've gone to protests, when I've gotten sick, it has been about love. It has been about loving the people in my family who were marginalized. It has been about loving the friends that I knew, my coworkers, loving just my neighbor. There's that whole supposed to love your neighbor thing. I'm not Christian, but I've heard of that. And so so anger can fuel love, or love can fuel that positive anger to show up,
Kirsten, I'm Oprah would say that's an aha moment. To look at your anger either love-based or fear-based is the ultimate question, right?
Right.
I mean, what you just said makes it so easy for everybody to be discernible, to have that, to say, okay, am I acting out of fear and pain and trauma, or am I acting out of
I think it's trickier though, because those January 6th folks would say, I love my country, and I was acting out of love.
Also, you look at the more conservative side of Christianity, the reason they protest all things pro-life, which is harmful to many women, is out of love for unborn children.
Okay, so let's address that, because
I don't believe that.
I don't either.
I think they're lying. Honestly,
I don't think they're lying, but I don't think they're being honest with themselves. I know
they care more about the imaginary than the real. It's the same thing with heaven and hell, and parents just throwing their children over, them going to heaven or hell in the future. So there's no reality in the abortion or heaven and hell.
But to them, there is. And so when you look at their motivations and if you look at their paradigm of the world, their worldview, and you say, okay, you can only make decisions out of love or fear.
I have a fear of you going to hell.
But you're still not making an argument because to them, they really, truly believe they're making it out of love. They really do.
Mhm.
They really, really
Yeah,
do.
my mom did too, but I think if you dissect it down to what,
Yeah, absolutely.
are you afraid of, I had a really great discussion today with someone over the inerrancy over of the Bible.
Mm.
And there was a couple of times I'm like, stop, listen to yourself. Because you can't say, well, I'm afraid of your soul, I'm afraid of your judgment and acting of that, I'm afraid that the election was rigged, when if you just listen to the words being said in your actions, where is the justice? And I'm hearing myself go, well, I'm afraid to be shot by the cops, I'm afraid, so where does that, oh, it's such a conundrum. I just talked myself in a circle.
I think what they're love is
but I
status
think
quo.
I
to
still
keep
think that's a
women where
good
they
question.
are.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Kirsten, you go.
I just, with that, I don't. I'm just gonna put it out there. This is but I don't think it's truly about loving this unborn child. I think they love the status quo and keeping things the way they are. Because if you love that unborn child, then you feed that child when they are born.
Yes,
Then you house that child. Then
100.
you have education and clothing for that child. And so it's not actually about the child at all.
See, and I want to build on that. Yes, I agree.
That it's a frame, it's a dog whistle
About
the core belief, which is about maintaining hierarchical and power and control.
See, if your entire life has been sanitized, and your biggest trauma is that you can't get your latte coffee, okay, you're going to have a paradigm in which you're going to search for something to fight for, and the abortion issue has been it among the white constituents of politicians, okay, but when you are exposed to the real history of this country, it is an unbroken fabric of trauma to marginalized people. All of a sudden, there's something else that comes into your sanitized world other than the abortion issue. In other words, if you're going to fight for abortion, what are we doing again for oppressed minorities? And she brought it up in regards to the unborn child that is now born and taking care of this child. In the political spectrum and the way that we process this, it really doesn't matter. I see the churches, see mostly evangelical churches still talking about, adoption and this, that, and the other, but they're still just skimming the surface on this. And you asked the question about how we can change. I think there's two things that I can say that I do. That number one is read the history of this country. And if you can stand it, okay, that's number one. That's number one. Number two is I'm all about going to the streets and being pushed to the front if I'm the token white man. Okay, I'm all over that. We owe that to them. But even more so, on a personal basis, get to know people that are oppressed people. I don't mean that you take a Thursday and I'm going to do my duty. I mean really get to know and listen to them, because then if they trust you, you'll be brought into their lives and you'll hear stuff that you've never heard before. And it's taken me years to get there. One of the things that benefits me is as a musician, it's helped me. But I have a reputation of being around people of color and being the guy that really does listen. And I'm hearing things that honestly we're not hearing.
No.
And basically when we talk about our trauma of what's happened the last few years politically, you know what they say? Welcome to my world.
Yeah. It's a good thing that we want equality and not revenge. That line has stuck in my head. I mean, the same for women, but again, Black women are literally, if you do a pyramid, Black women are, and then if you add them into the LGBTQ community, they're, at the very bottom. And if we are going to have righteous rage like Jesus had, like, the good trouble with John Lewis, with those types of things, even Muhammad in Islam, you have to do it to protect those people at the bottom. If you're defending those people at the top, you're part of the problem.
Well, and I think also to go with what Tim's saying, it's not just helping the people at the bottom; it's going to the bottom with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Be at the bottom.
really going there.
Perfectly said.
Not just a token going there.
No,
really going there and setting up camp.
Yeah.
2 years ago, the main speaker on the last day of the Goose, Joe, and I always say her name wrong. It's like Lumen, I think, but I always want to say Lululemon from like the leggings. It's not Lululemon, but anyways, she was the most phenomenal speaker. And she spoke on the last day of the Goose. She was the main keynote speaker the last day of the Goose. And she talked about how there was this ladder that we're all climbing. And we think as whites that our job is to help give a helping hand to help other people climb the ladder. She goes, no, that's not what we want. We want you to burn the ladder to the ground.
Nice.
And I was like, oh.
There you go.
Oh,
yeah.
It's not about helping them to the top. It's about demolishing the ladder of the pyramid.
I got goosebumps on that one. Yes.
Yeah. And I thought that was really helpful. And so that's what Tim's saying, right? Like, we don't need to just do the token, like, oh, on Thursdays I go visit the bottom. No, go live at the bottom, be at the bottom, make your whole life down there. Because if you spend time with the best of the people in the world who are at the bottom, more people will come down there. You'll be able to have the stronger numbers, the strength, the versatility to burn the whole thing down. Well, and I think that's where the righteous anger comes in, right? Is we don't want to just, fix the ladder. We want to burn it down, and not in a destructive way, but in a constructive way for everyone.
Yeah.
Where this is beneficial to, it's not about harming the people at the top. It's, I'm happy to help them down, give them a helping hand down, right? Like, I don't want to hurt the people at the top. I don't want them to fall off the ladder, but I will help them down, and we're going to burn this thing down. Like, it's not about harming anyone, but it is about saying what you're doing here is harmful to everyone else, and we're going to dissemble it. Well, and I think that was really helpful for me to change my paradigm.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I asked as a child about Jesus's rage in the temple, and how that was justified.
Yeah.
When my mom said is because he didn't hurt anyone. And I sat with that for so long, and I still kind of wrestle with it because, on one side, I'm like, yeah, go Jesus, down with capitalism. On the other side, I think, what if those merchants were poor and he just threw all the money? And, because there's so much human judgment involved in the way that we view our anger as to whether or not we're going to justify it. And I mean, do no harm is where I always stake my claim, for now, present, be present. But we've seen demonstrations of righteous anger throughout history. So can we learn from those sages to say this is the way they did it and this is the way we should learn from it? Or again, burn all the shit down and start new?
And burning things down doesn't have to be literal, right? Like, I'm not advocating going to your politician's house and burning their house down. Although, can we talk about how our founding fathers did exactly that? We talk about how this country was founded. It was absolutely founded on violence, like even just in seeking our independence, they raided, they looted, they, rioted, they burned people's houses down. Yeah. Like, they did serious violence and vandalism.
And they were not about setting up an equal country.
Right. Never was.
They were land speculators who were pissed off
yes
that the British government was intruding on their empire building. They were rich.
But we get really uppity in this country about vandalism and riots and things like that. Right. I find myself very much in the middle here. As a person who's white, I have no reason to riot, and I'm not going to participate in it. But I am also not going to condemn people who do, who have very real reasons. And, Martin Luther King also said that riots are the language of the people who are oppressed, who have not been listened to when they are peacefully protesting.
Exactly.
When the peaceful protests are not listened to, it will lead to riots. It will. And so I'm not going to be judgmental about that. I'm not going to participate because I feel that in that rock and hard place, kind of like it's a catch-22 kind of, but I am not going to condemn people who have gotten to that point. And I'm staunchly nonviolent. But
violence is not the answer. Violence is
They also
not,
get it, right? And again, how do we define violence? If it's not violence against a person, but it's violence against their property, well, you then harm that person. And we get into these nuanced situations and these nuanced conversations. And my answer tends to be, well, there's a really easy way to stop that. And that's to listen to them before.
There you go.
But no one wants
Correct.
to hear that answer, right? They don't want the accountability.
Let me also, I'm the oldest here. And I do remember a lot of the protests in Vietnam. I do remember a lot of the violence. At one time, I was even approached by groups from the Weathermen, and I was not ready to burn it all down. But to answer your question, Sherry, it's not either leave it standing or burn it down. There are some things that do need to be burned down completely. And let me say, and I don't know how far it should go with this, but I'm not a sheltered person. I served for over 20 years in the Presbyterian ministry. I'm educated. I know all the background of it. And religion in this country is going to have to be addressed because religion has been the engine for injustice in this country. Part of my reading for seminary was J. Henley Thornwell, which is one of the most brilliant Presbyterian theologians, but he also defended slavery to the nth degree. And that's why we got to quit somehow thinking this is just backwater people. It's people that can have high education, even a classical education, to defend these things. I want to make this point, and then I'm going to have 3 quotes, and then I'm done for the night.
Thanks for
J. Henley Thornwell began to respond against abolitionists, and I had the quotes. I just read them to Kirsten last week. Because Marxism was on the rise. And he called, at that time, we could get into the argument regarding Republican or Democrat, but at the time, it was the Republicans of the North had switched the names. Okay, we can talk about this. He called them Red Republicans, referred to them as Red Republicans, communist. This was back in the mid-19th century. Karl Marx even wrote, I believe it was the New York Times, a series of articles that was defending the abolitionists. To this day, I mean, Martin Luther King was looked at as a communist. To this day, if you push against that system, you are charged with being a communist. And the quotes I'm about to read here, there may be some listeners that are listening and say, oh, he's quoting these communists. This is as old as it can be. You're not telling me anything new, and you're dead wrong. I want to quote 3 quotes. One is from James Baldwin, the other from Martin Luther King Jr., the last Malcolm X. And yes, Malcolm X, I think the man was brilliant. James Baldwin said this regarding anger. To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time. And in one's work. And part of that rage is this. It isn't only what has happened to you, but what is happening all around you. And all the time in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference of most white people in this country and their ignorance. Here's Martin Luther King. The supreme task is to organize and unite people so that their anger becomes a transforming force. And lastly, Malcolm X.
Yes.
Usually when people are sad, they don't do anything. They just cry over their condition. But when they get angry, they bring about change. I would again say that we need to, and if we do not have true meaningful dialogue with people that have been oppressed and systemically oppressed in this country, and as Wallace said, that slavery has just mutated and evolved, then we are not going to be able to understand anger at all.
Those were perfect quotes, Tim. Thank you. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Kirsten, did you have anything to say before we start wrapping it up? You look like at one point you were.
Oh no, it's hard to, it's hard to top Malcolm X and James Baldwin and come up with something that's really pithy to sum things up with. The agency that I work for has We're part of a larger movement across the country that's called the Move to End Violence. There's a website. Anyway, but one of the things we have is what we call the last girl. It's an idea or a theme or whatever that's in our work. And so the last girl, if you think about picking sides for soccer, the last kid that's left that nobody wants. So the last girl is the person who is facing the most barriers, who has the least opportunities, etc. And so if we create a world that is safe, healthy, has opportunities for the last girl, everybody else is lifted. Yeah. So focus our efforts on the last girl. What is she asking for? What does she want? Let's help her, and everybody else, just get out of the way. And what happens is everything else rises too. So we need to be angry on behalf of the last girl. Yes. That whole "I'm not angry because it doesn't affect me" is a really white thing. We're taught to be, individualists and whatever. And that whole communal thing is how folks have survived. And that's actually how the human species has survived. And that part of white culture is really new and strange and has not been to our benefit.
When you say that, I think of Obama saying, "You didn't build this."
Yes.
And all of the white people went, "Yes, we did." Yeah, right. And he's like, "No, you didn't. It was a community effort, and the individualism is scary, and that will definitely get me angry.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have reached the top of the hour of this phenomenal show. There has been so much good shit said today that I absolutely love this show. Danae, any final words, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to this topic of righteous anger, obviously there's so many other things we could have talked about, right? Like we talked about racism and the abortion issue and LGBTQ rights and anyone who's marginalized. But I think that one of the things that, Sherry, you addressed earlier is kind of like, how do you actually do anything, right? And so, I'll go back to my answer that if your anger, it really is righteous, you're going to do something about it. You're not just going to sit around. But I also understand that's really overwhelming, right? What do I do? And so again, looking to people who are marginalized, getting to know people who are marginalized, who are already doing something and take their lead, follow their lead. But also, I tend to kind of go back to when Paul talks about how the body is given gifts so that way the whole body works together as one, right? So the whole church has all of its needs taken care of, right? I think that that's true in pretty much every aspect of humanity. And there are going to be things when it comes to activism or being active in some way, shape, or form on behalf of that righteous anger that are going to hit your heart more than mine. And that's okay. I'm a strong believer that all activism has to be intersectional or it's worthless. Yeah. But at the same time, I am going to be just a little more passionate about maybe LGBTQ rights, and you might be more passionate about Black rights, and you might be more passionate about disabled rights, and you might be more passionate about women's rights. And it is okay as long as we're all taking action and then also supporting each other. And I think most of my efforts may be focused in one area, but I'm going to support all my friends who are also putting their efforts in other areas. And that's how we create less burnouts, because we can't do it all, right? Or we can't do it all at once. And so we kind of pick the thing that hits your heart the most at the moment and do something about it. And then encourage your friends to do the same thing. And then you kind of have those little droplets, right? And we all become bigger and bigger and more powerful together. And because the other option is to do nothing or to do everything and burn out. And those just aren't options right now. We need sustainable change and we need sustainable action to make that change. So big fan of do something with your righteous anger, find people who are marginalized and follow them.
Love it. And you can find Danae at deconstructioncoaching.com. Yep. Tim?
We need to move from I am angry to we are angry. That's number one. And number two is I like Occam's razor. Let's reduce it down. If righteous anger is that, learn to do what's right.
I like that. You can find Tim on Facebook.
Yeah.
Kristen?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook too. Call your legislators.
Yes.
Call your legislators. half the time you're not talking to them, you're just talking to an answering machine.
Mhm.
It's easy. They never hear from their constituents. One phone call is like 200 or 300 phone calls. Call, email, text,
Yes.
whatever.
Channel
Call your
that anger.
legislators.
Yep. Agreed.
Well, any final words?
Just thank you so much for inviting me. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I feel very honored. Thank you.
What a great show. Thank you all so much, and I will see you backstage.
Okay.
I love getting smarter, and I love finding constructive ways to run my life. And I think this show helped me, and I hope it helped you just as much. We all have passions for a reason. And when you get angry, find out why. Find out if it's true. When I see something totally insane online, I research it. I find out if it's true and if my anger is justified. So do the same. Protect yourself, protect your heart, protect your anger, and protect your neighbor. That anger can be used and fueled and taken, but never, never to violence. I love you. Have a wonderful week. I will see you next week. And as you know, walk in love. I'll see you soon. Mwah! Bye.